D.C. in our virtual town hall. We appreciate your taking time out tonight to pay attention to what we're talking about, things that we all care about. There is a lot to talk about, and I think that's part of the Trump strategy of flood the zone. And what we've learned at community meetings and town halls before is when you talk about 20 things in an hour or two, it's hard to do a deep dive. So we thought tonight we'd focus on one major issue, the reconciliation bill, the Trump budget, and what it means, because it is a big thing, but it's not beautiful. It will hurt a lot of people and help very few. But we thought we'd bring some experts on tonight to help us unpack all this and understand exactly what it means to all of you. Vaishu Jawahar, Deputy Director of Policy Program at Protect Our Care, will explain the health care portions of the bill. And Michael Linden, Campaign Director at Families Over Billionaires, will explain the tax and economic portion of the bill. And my Chief of Staff, Robin Russell, will moderate and forcefully keep us on time. Obviously, we received a lot of questions in advance, and we'll get through most of them. We're going to take some of those questions live, so please put them in the chat where my staff is currently monitoring them. We're going to balance both. If we don't get to your question, don't worry. We will get through all we can, but we're going to continue to have additional community meetings and virtual and in-person town hall meetings to talk about those on an ongoing basis. And feel free to tell us what you'd like us to do a deep dive on next time. My staff is always available to answer your questions. But before we get to the meat of the program tonight, I just want to explain a little bit about what's happening. Despite the many challenges our country is facing, rising costs from everything from housing to health care, national and international security issues, our Republican colleagues are focused on one thing: reconciliation. That's really a fancy word for a budget bill that reduces taxes for the top 1% of all wage earners, and it does so by throwing about 13 million people off their health care insurance. The president talked a big game about helping the middle class and working class people, but where the rubber meets the road, it's a different story. This truly benefits the ultra wealthy. So to begin this, unpacking this bill and helping us all understand it, let's get to the questions.
All right. Thanks, Congressman Quigley. Vaishu, I'm going to kick the first question to you. This one is from Michelle in our district, and she asked, what changes are proposed specifically in the bill for Medicaid and Medicare? Over to you.
So put simply, we're looking at the biggest loss of health care in American history. What this bill does is really claws away at the pillars of American health care, everything from Medicaid to the ACA. This is the biggest cut to Medicaid in American history. We're looking at altogether, like the congressman said, 14 million people losing access to health care. And that's a very serious thing, especially when it's all happening to give tax breaks to billionaires, people who own yachts, corporations. It's unconscionable and it's fiscally irresponsible. Medicaid, for example, covers about 70 million Americans, 8 million seniors. A lot of seniors rely on it for long-term care. Nearly half of American children are covered by Medicaid, and over 15 million people with disabilities also count on it for their health care. So in addition to being a safety net for millions of low-income families, it's really your neighbors who are counting on Medicaid, and it's way more people than you think. On top of that, this bill will hike premiums for over 24 million Americans because Republicans believe that tax breaks for the rich are more important than tax credits that help middle-class families and small business owners afford health care. And lastly, because Republicans are sneaky, they have stuck a multi-billion-dollar giveaway to Big Pharma in this package, and that's in addition to the huge tax breaks these corporations are already getting. They're creating a giant loophole in the Medicare drug price negotiation program that's really going to come on the backs of seniors and taxpayers, especially seniors who have rare diseases and will struggle to afford these medications now.
Thanks, Vaishu. I'm going to kick the next question back to Congressman Quigley and go a little bit deeper about what this is really going to mean for Chicago and for our constituents. So I have two questions here. Cynthia in Chicago said, For a family member, I'm most concerned about cuts to Medicaid coverage for chronic mental illnesses like bipolar. Will coverage for such conditions be cut? And Sandra asked, what would happen to people like me who are on permanent disability if Medicaid is cut? We'd also love to hear you talk a little bit about how these cuts would impact seniors and children in Illinois in the 5th District.
When I talk about this to my constituents, and I talk about this nationally, I try to get people to understand this isn't about somebody else. This affects everyone. Everyone at least knows somebody on Medicaid, and it's extremely important that we protect it. In Illinois, 40% of all babies are born on Medicaid. 3.2 million people in Illinois rely on Medicaid. This includes grandparents receiving skilled nursing care, thousands of people with disabilities that receive those services that let them go back to their communities and allow them to live at home and get back to work. It's the single largest payer for mental health services in the United States. Cuts to Medicaid will harm many people's access to this health care. But as I spread this word on to my Republican friends, in Illinois, our rural hospitals will close, leaving pregnant women and seniors to drive more than an hour or more for care. But I've also heard from local hospitals in Chicago, like Lurie's, Northwestern, and others, that they rely so much on Medicaid that if it's cut, they'll contract all of their services. So everybody in Chicago who uses our extraordinary assets, those hospitals, will have contracted services because Medicaid is so important. It sounds hyperbolic to talk about these things, but people will die if Medicaid is cut in this way. So my pledge to all of you is I'm going to use my voice and my vote in everywhere possible to protect Medicaid at all reasonable costs.
Great. I want to turn us now. I know there's a lot on healthcare in this, and we're going to take a live question from folks that are tuning in online, but I do want to talk a little bit about SNAP, the Supplemental Nutrition Assistance Program, also known as food stamps. Vaishu, do you want to share a little bit about what this bill does to cut the SNAP program?
So this bill is going to take $290 billion away from the SNAP program. That's equivalent to about 30% of their budget. So it's a huge cut. And again, these are Republicans putting their money where their mouth is and deciding who they prioritize in this country. And they're not prioritizing children who are going hungry in schools. They're prioritizing billionaires like Elon Musk. We're looking at potentially 18 million kids going hungry in schools because they don't have access to school lunch anymore. So whether it's work requirements or shifting costs to states, a cut is a cut, and this is going to hurt a lot of families at a really difficult time. We're looking into potentially a recession. We're looking at tariffs that are going to skyrocket the cost of groceries, and we're going to have even more families go hungry in this country, thanks to the way that Republicans are prioritizing who matters.
Thank you for that. And maybe before I hand it to the Congressman to talk a little bit more about SNAP, I wanted to just follow up. For people that are tuning in at home and they say, work requirements, isn't that reasonable? Shouldn't people work in order to receive these government benefits? What does that mean in actuality? How does that work on the ground?
So put simply, work requirements don't work. Work requirements do not increase employment. There's no research that shows that. They simply increase the paperwork burden. And the idea is to drown so many families who are already struggling in this additional paperwork that it creates savings that then they can pass on to extremely wealthy families and corporations. So work requirements are nothing more than burdensome paperwork designed to throw people off the rolls of these programs so you can have these tax cuts for the rich. They're a huge scam, and unfortunately, they don't improve anyone's health or ability to keep a job or ability to stay well nourished so that they can show up at work feeling their best. So sadly, work requirements will only hurt people, and we have to ask why.
Robin, do you mind if I jump in just
Please.
to add, first of all, almost everybody on Medicaid or who receives food stamps either is already working, is caring for a loved one, or is has a disability or is a child. These are not people who we expect to be working. Only 3% of people on Medicaid are working age adults who don't either currently have a job, have been working recently, or will be working very soon. It's a very small population. And I'll just note that in Georgia, they actually do have work requirements for Medicaid already. And what actually happened, exactly as Vaishu said, is hundreds of thousands of people who are eligible for Medicaid were not able to get it because they couldn't fill out the monthly paperwork. Imagine monthly paperwork to keep your health insurance. That's all that this is. These are not work requirements. These are bureaucratic red tape to make it harder for people to get the benefits that they deserve.
Thank you both for unpacking that. And I'll just turn it back to Congressman Quigley to chime in on the impacts of these SNAP cuts for folks in Illinois.
Yeah, back in Illinois, let's just remember, 62% are families with children, the ones that are receiving. 30% of the SNAP household includes seniors. We're talking about our most vulnerable. But you also want these folks to be healthy because that reduces health care costs. And it's extremely important that people eat a healthy meal. So when you're cutting out 18 million kids from having a healthy lunch, and you expect them to be healthy and to learn and be productive members of society, you're working in the opposite direction.
Yep, great. Thank you for that. And I was just listening to one of our staff members who was giving me a question from the chat, and we have received a question about abortion access and specifically the defunding of Planned Parenthood and what this bill would mean for access to reproductive health services. Congressman, you want to take that one?
Look, the bill eliminates funding for Planned Parenthood, a devastating loss for women and families that rely on Planned Parenthood, not just for what they're focusing about publicly, but just for basic health care. A lot of people learn that when they go to college, that a lot of young women, their primary health care is going through Planned Parenthood clinics. You're cutting that out in its entirety, and it will be devastating for those women and their families.
Thank you for that. I'm going to move us along because I know time is tight, and we're going to move to the tax portion, which is equally complex and confusing. So, Michael, we're hoping that you can unpack this for us. I do want to bring in a question from the district. Paul from Inverness asked, Republicans sell their tax cuts as a tax cut for all. What's the best way to highlight the truth in this statement, but the absurdity that the benefits are mostly for the rich?
Yeah, well, let's start by saying it's not true. Many families will get no benefit from this tax bill. Some will even pay more, and then when you add on the health care cuts and the cuts to food assistance and the higher energy costs that come from this bill because they cut subsidies for lower energy costs, about 40% of Americans will actually pay more under this bill, not less. So yes, Republicans will say this is a tax cut for everybody, but that's actually not true. About 40% of Americans will actually pay more. Now, who will pay less? There are people who will pay less. The very wealthy will pay less. The average tax cut for somebody in the top 0.1%, these are people making more than about $5 million a year, their average tax cut will be roughly $400,000 a year. $400,000 a year will be their tax cut. And that's because the provisions in the tax law are heavily skewed to people at the top in a variety of ways. They have a bigger tax break for wealthy people who inherit enormous estates from their parents or grandparents. They have a new tax break for private equity firms. They have a bigger tax break for very large businesses that are organized in a special way to reduce taxes. And the tax benefits for working families are either non-existent or temporary and more than offset by the cuts to health care and food assistance. And that's why you have this really upside-down pattern where people at the very top will pay a lot less and people in the middle will be affected by the cuts. People at the bottom will pay more. Thanks
for that. Depressing.
It is.
But we appreciate you unpacking it. Congressman, I want to also, in addition to the sort of immediate harms of this tax bill and impact, zoom out a little bit and talk a little bit about what are the sort of longer-term ramifications of passing this tax bill.
Yeah, and let me focus first on the few tax provisions that would help working people, the provisions relating to taxes on tips and so forth. The fact is, those expire at the end of Trump's term, 2028. So that means in 4 years, the taxes are going to go up on working people. But the tax breaks for the very wealthy that Michael talks about, those are forever. So this is built in to give people the false impression that they're going to be helped long term. But in reality, the working people, they're going to get these breaks for a short period of term, and they really don't compare to what the wealthiest Americans are going to get anyway. But I think we also have to add and look at this. The Republicans are supposed to be the party of fiscal responsibility, but the fact of the matter is our national debt is already $36 trillion, and these cuts are projected to add $5 trillion more over the next 10 years. So the best indicator of future performance is past. The previous Trump tax cuts that went forward, again, added to the national debt a dramatic amount, trillions of dollars, helped about 1% of the American people, and grew the economy in just a minuscule amount of money. So when you add that to the Bush tax cuts, the Republicans have added about $10 trillion to the national debt by helping the wealthiest Americans.
Yes, thank you for that. And I did want to bring up, we did receive a question also, and maybe Michael and the Congressman, you guys can both weigh in on this. One of the indicators is this downgrade of America's credit rating from Moody's. And so why do you think that happened? And then what does that mean for the average American person? You know, it can sound a little bit inside the Beltway or something that only Wall Street pays attention to, but why would the average person care about America's credit rating from Moody's? Michael, you want to kick us off?
Yeah, so, you know, if you step back and think about 25 years ago, we actually had a balanced budget at that time, and we were projected to head towards a debt-free country, which seems incredible to think about today. But what happened since then was, especially as the Congressman just mentioned, massive tax cuts over and over again that were mostly tilted to people at the very top. And as a result, the debt today is on this upward trajectory, this upward path. And in fact, if we had never enacted those tax cuts over the last 25 years, which were enacted under George W. Bush and then Donald Trump the first term, and now they want to do more, the debt would actually be declining today, not rising. So if you are worried about our fiscal future, you know, you got to stop digging that tax cut hole that we've been in for the last 25 years. But the real reason that people should be worried about this, you can see it in the rest of the bill right now. Today, Republicans say we don't have enough resources to make sure that people have a healthy meal, to make sure that they have excellent, affordable care. We have to cut Medicaid. We have to cut food stamps because we simply don't have the money. But the reason we don't have the money is because they've been cutting taxes for so many years. And that's caused the debt to rise. And as a result, they say we must cut spending in order to get the debt down. But in fact, as the Congressman said, this bill will actually add to the debt because they're spending even more money on tax breaks for the wealthy. So that's the way, I mean, when I talk to people about why the budget deficit matters to everyday people, it's because people in Washington then use that as a reason not to invest in Americans here at home, not to invest in solving the problems that Americans have and say, we don't have the money. Well, we would have the money if we'd stop cutting taxes for rich people.
Yeah. Yep.
The Moody's impact is coupled with the national debt. I mean, the two work hand in hand to make things more difficult, to make paying our interest rates on the debts the U.S. have higher, which in turn will make all interest rates higher and more expensive to live. The mortgage rates, rates for cars, student loans, and so forth. It will impact businesses and their ability to function, how much it costs to operate in the United States. So it builds upon itself. When the debt's higher, it costs more to govern, and of course, as Michael has talked about, it makes it more expensive and less likely that they can provide essential services that we care about. It should be a focus that government matters because of what it does for the American people, and we don't want to hurt or make government less effective. This does both.
Yep. And I'm just listening. Our comms team just gave me a question that we got in the chat, which is actually related to very timely because in T-minus at 1 a.m., the Rules Committee here in Washington, D.C. is going to be considering this big reconciliation bill. We're going to know whether or not it's going to move to the floor for a vote. It is supposed to be on the floor of the House on Thursday for a vote. So the question we got from someone online is there opposition to block this bill? Are we building enough opposition either in the House or the Senate, or is this thing going to pass?
Well, first of all, every single Democrat in the House has voted against this bill every time it has come to the floor in its different iterations, and I assume that will be the case again if there's an opportunity. And there's only a 3-seat majority in this House of Representatives, and so I am hopeful that some Republican members will look at the facts of this bill and decide that the health of their own community members, their own constituents, is more important than the wealth of their donors. We'll see. It's still a long process. Even if it does come to the floor, even if it does pass with without a single Democratic vote, the Senate still has to weigh in, and it will probably come back to the House. So we still have time to build that opposition. And I will just say, if you're hearing all of this and you're thinking to yourself, this sounds bananas. That's a technical tax term, bananas.
Yes.
You're not alone. Most Americans, regardless of their party affiliation, agree that we should not be cutting Medicaid and food stamps to pay for tax cuts for billionaires. So you're not alone. You are in the majority, the vast majority of Americans who think this is really on the wrong track.
Part of what my job is to put pressure on my Republican colleagues by talking about this with my voice and using my voice and my vote, the only leverage I really have, to speak directly to the American people about how this affects all of them and why they should care. What's interesting now is we seem to have the extremes being in the Republican Party opposed to this legislation. One saying that the bill doesn't go far enough, there needs to be more cuts, and concerns with the deficits that we talked about previously. And another side of the Republican Party saying it's too extreme, and their concerns with Medicaid, for example. And I hope the reasons come to the forefront. But the fact that the Speaker of the House scheduled a critical meeting on this, a Rules Committee meeting on this, he scheduled it at 1 in the morning, is the fact that they appreciate the fact that sunlight is the best of disinfectants. Not a lot of sunlight in Washington, D.C. in May at 1 o'clock in the morning. It should let people know what they're trying to do isn't kosher.
Yeah. Not popular, which is why you have to do it in the middle of the night. I think we can come back and we can talk more about what's in the bill, but I do want to move us on a little bit to just unpack, a few other things around what you're doing, Congressman, to push back on this bill and to push back on a lot of what the Trump administration is doing right now, what constituents can do who are tuning in. And so I'll just start with 2 questions. One, Bonnie from Barrington said, what specific steps are you and other Democrats taking to stop Trump's budget and his unlawful, destructive dismantling of the federal government? And Linda from Palatine wrote, people are fearful about what Trump is doing to our country. It seems like not enough people in Congress are concerned and willing to stop him. What is really happening to fight back?
Look, as I said, we've got our voice and our vote, and people have a right to ask this question. I encourage them to reach out to our office and all members of Congress, talk to their friends about, if they're in other districts, especially red districts, about why this matters. They should realize that this pressure has worked, right? The rallies that have taken place, the Hands Across America, the conferences that they have attended, this stuff matters, the letter they're writing. It is starting to feed back in the pressure that the Republicans are feeling on this, and the President of the United States. They have pulled back on a number of these measures. So for me, it's I just questioned and examined the Secretary of Transportation last week about the cuts they're talking about to transportation and housing. We're on local news, national news, again, talking to not just our own constituents and our own base, but to all Americans willing to listen about the fact that all of these things matter to you for different reasons, and trying to explain exactly why they should care and they should make a difference, and not just take it for granted when someone tells them this is a big, beautiful bill. And on our vote, you know, Michael mentioned that the Democrats have been in unison, but, you know, in committee we offered dozens of amendments to try to change this and to leverage all that and pressure them into votes that are just so reasonable. So, you know, we're using our vote, we're using discharge petitions. It took the Speaker of the House to change a rule when we were trying to get rid of some of the horrible tariffs that make everyone spend more money. He had to change the rules to make that more difficult. So we're pushing them every way we can. So voice, vote, and feet, you know, it's examples like Chris Van Hollen going to El Salvador on this, are going to our districts and traveling to the places that matter in the United States to highlight what's taking place and why people should care. The last thing I'll mention is the courts. I do think some people think that we're able to sue directly. Unfortunately, the only entity and the person in the House that can sue is the Speaker. We don't have standing, the ability to sue in the courts. So we rely very heavily on those court actions. And I'll say the courts are hanging in there pretty strong. And we work extremely well with organizations like the ACLU to back them up, fired federal employees and others, to help in those lawsuits through amicus briefs, Friends of the Court briefs. So we're adding our voice there as well as we possibly can, and recognizing that the public has a lot to do with that, and that pressure that the president, not even the president of the Republicans, can live in a vacuum.
Yep. And maybe, Michael and Vice Chair, I'll open it up to you, too. You all are observers of Congress. What are you seeing is effective, and what are you seeing that maybe isn't as effective? What would you maybe like to see more of in terms of pushing back?
I think that part of what we're seeing at Protect Our Care is anytime you can share a personal story of how you've relied on Medicaid or the ACA, or your drug costs are simply getting too high and you can't stand for Congress to continue siding with Big Pharma, is really helpful and the most effective. I think one example we're seeing right now is we're all surprised to see Senator Hawley from Missouri speak up about Medicaid cuts. And that comes from getting a lot of pressure within his district and people writing and calling it does matter. And we should do more of that. And there can be a stigma with these programs sometimes, but more people than you realize rely on it, and everyone goes through hard times. And I think there should be no shame in speaking up about it. And especially in this moment, your neighbors are counting on you to speak up about it. So,
Michael, what do you think?
I'll only add that it's really important to talk to your family and friends about what's happening in Congress. You are watching this town hall right now. You're participating, and I appreciate it. I'm sure the congressman appreciates it. But your family and friends may not have the chance to see this or hear this, and they may not be in this district. And honestly, hearing it from you, that, hey, did you hear that Congress is about to cut Medicaid? Did you hear that they are going to do another tax cut for rich people? That actually will matter a lot more than hearing it from me. As much as I believe that I have a powerful voice, your voice is actually more powerful to your family and friends. So I would really encourage you to tell people about what's happening in Congress and ask them to speak up as well. It matters a lot. Members of Congress are responsive to their constituents, and they don't like it when they think they're on the wrong side of the issue. And Republicans are on the wrong side of this issue, and they know it, which is why they're scheduling key votes at 1 a.m. in the morning.
Great. And I want to ask one question that we're getting live from the chat about one tool in the toolbox that a lot of folks in our district had brought up. Andre from East Lakeview asked, why not move to impeach Donald Trump? Is that a tool in the toolbox we should be using right now?
Look, it's something that's talked about by the Democrats. We recognize that this was something that was done twice. The only president that's been impeached twice in the history of the United States in his first time in office. I think they recognize that being in the minority, the chances of it actually succeeding, and will that have a negative or a positive impact on how the rest of the world and the country looks at this. So it's a tool there. I'm not sure it's one that people in the House feel would be effective given the circumstances, being in the minority in the House and the Senate, and indeed in this perverse world will indeed draw sympathy from some. Makes no sense to me. Clearly I voted for impeachment twice. I was part of the House Permanent Select Committee on Intelligence investigation into the first impeachment, so I played a very active role. This is a president that when he gets in the room with the truth, a fight breaks out. He has no qualms violating the rule of law, and I think he's committed additional impeachment offenses. But right now we have to ask ourselves, what's the most effective way to move on? And it's not something that that people have forgotten, but at this point, being in the minority, I'm not sure they want to move forward.
Thanks for that. Michael, Vaishu, anything else you guys want to add on this? Have you been debating this at all within your organizations?
You know, we're at Families Over Billionaires, we're really focused on protecting working families, people who are struggling to make ends meet, and making sure that their interests are at the center of this debate here in Washington about taxes and the budget. And I honestly think we need to focus on their needs and their concerns right now. I'm very worried that, you know, almost 15 million people are going to lose their health insurance. I'm really worried that 18 million kids are going to not have school meals, that millions of people will not get food assistance, all to pay for tax breaks for people at the very, very top. And I really want us to focus exclusively on that as much as we can, because those are real people. Those are people in your neighborhoods. Those are people in my neighborhood. And that's why I came to Washington, to try and fight for those people, and that's what I'm going to keep doing at Families Over Billionaires.
Thanks. Echoing what Michael said, at Protect Our Care, we believe not a single dollar should be taken from American health care to fund tax breaks for the rich. That's not something we agree with. That's not what we're focused on. And I think we're focused on what's tangible to American families rather than what can be seen at times as symbolic.
Thanks. I do want to get, in addition to what Congress can do and what we can do here in D.C., ultimately, what can people around the country do? And we believe, I think, that they're the most important sort of piece in all of this. So I want to bring in Catherine from Arlington Heights. Asked, there are so many individual issues, but the overarching questions are, how can we protect our democracy and our Constitution? Is there anything that we can do to prevent the destruction of what we hold dear? So what can folks do?
Yeah, let me. What I've said, it seems contradictory, but I think the first thing I would tell my constituents, friends, and family is, every once in a while, I got to take a break from this. This is a toxic environment. It can be very overwhelming, and the news is seemingly worse every single day. So I want you to engage, and we'll talk about that, but I also want everybody to take a break from it every once in a while. Turn away from the news, be with your loved ones, commune with nature, get away from the stress of it. And then as you strengthen yourself and you move forward, it's time to engage. And there's just so much people can do. One of the things is just, if you're doing things to help other people, continue that. Disengaging and not being active in your community isn't an option. Democracy is not a spectator sport. But there's also the charitable work that people can do, and I think that creates an atmosphere that gives other people hope at the same time. So walk, join groups. Collective action is still extremely important. We're stronger together. We see groups like Indivisible, Citizen Action, Moms Demand Action, Citizens Climate Lobby, and just so many more that are becoming more and more active. And the strength that comes with that, also builds each other's faith in the system, that there are others out there that cares. Talk with folks, and don't stay in your bubbles. I think sometimes it's healthy to talk with folks you disagree with. Empathy has its role. Try to understand why the other person feels the way they do. Get out of our information bubbles and try to understand that, so maybe you can make a better case for defending your point. We have to listen to everyone and help try to change opinions, but also understand why they're doing this and why it matters. Chalk, write to other people, write to Republicans. You know, maybe not do it in chalk, but walk, talk, and chalk was so clever I couldn't resist. People need to hear from you. Use personal stories as we talked about this. Facts and figures and statistics, you know, at some point are meaningless. But you hear one very human story, and it can be extremely compelling when you talk about this in the press, editorials, op-eds, or when you're just sharing it with other people.
Great. Vice Chair Michael, one more concrete thing that folks should do?
Well, they could go to familiesoverbillionaires.org or protectourcare.org. But I do agree with the Congressman. You know, this is a marathon, unfortunately. We're not going to solve all of these problems all at once, and it can be really overwhelming and really exhausting. So, you know, being mindful of that for yourself, but know that it's working. Know that it makes a difference. It matters that the public opinion on this bill is so bad. The public does not want this bill. That was not preordained. That matters because people spoke up. People said, I don't want this. So, you know, we have a long way to go, but I do think talking to your family and friends about this and sharing your personal story, I couldn't agree more. Every single person in America will be affected by this bill. Your grocery costs will go up. Your energy costs will go up. Your healthcare costs will go up. Even if you're not on Medicaid yourself, they will because of what the Congressman talked about, hospitals contracting, drug prices going up. So you have a stake in this, and just expressing your own personal stake in it makes such a huge difference.
And I'll just add, this week I've been thinking a lot about my favorite childhood TV show growing up, Mr. Rogers' Neighborhood. And he always said, in times of crisis, look for the helpers. And I'm very grateful to be at an org where I'm surrounded by helpers, and they help me keep up the fight every day. And I'm sure if you look in your community, there are tons of helpers too. But if you'd like to join the fight, go to protectourcare.org.
Thanks, Vaishu. I want to bring in this question from Mary Lou. I think she asked a really important question here, which is not just what are we against, but what are we for? What is your view of the vision and messaging the Democratic Party should be pushing to motivate either those who voted for Trump or sat out the election?
You know, we can talk about Trump all day and night because there's a lot to talk about. I try to tell folks that you will be less safe and things will cost more as a result of the president's policies. So Democrats, when they talk about what they do, should focus on those things as well. How do we make things less expensive, particularly housing, health care, and energy? That's what's driving so much of the cost that people face on a daily basis. How do we address those issues? And I do think that there was a lot done under President Biden's measure, Inflation Reduction Act, where we can actually have competitive pricing and bidding for prescription drugs for the very, very first time. But we can do so much more. And a lot of what's driving the cost for housing and energy is we just need to have more housing. Much of the housing crisis comes from a shortage, a scarcity that's driving up everyday costs. We have to address the issues of energy production and its transmission if we're ever going to have a sustainable future. You know, they're going to run hand in hand. We have to have sustainable energy to drive down the cost and to have enough where we don't have shortages on any of those manners. You know, and I think that we also need to talk about what the envy of the world, what they see with us, and that's our education system. You know, not attacking our extraordinary education institutions, but building them up because of the research they do. That's incredibly important for our economy, to make people safe, to provide extraordinary health care to our people and folks across the world. And talking about education that creates real opportunities for jobs. And that's not just four-year education, but the extraordinary asset that's our community colleges and the trade programs that come from those and what people can do, invest in training and apprentices in jobs like electrician, machines, HVAC repair, and so much more. Recognizing that pursuit of happiness in the American dream has many paths, but providing that opportunity for them and facilitating that. So, and finally, in part about making you safer, I think it's reasonable supporting the police, but gun safety that comes in hand with that. Universal background checks, cutting down on gun trafficking, and back to keeping us safe. Food safety, airline safety, and the opposite of what the Trump administration is doing, fully funding the FAA and the FDA to ensure the food that we eat is safe and that your flights will get you there safely. And finally, from an international point of view, re-engaging with our allies. Right now, we're tariffing them or telling our best allies like NATO that they're on their own. What FDR taught us was that our welfare is dependent on the welfare of countries far away. And the only way to have a friend is to be a friend. So engaging with our allies and being friends with them makes us safer. And we understand the world can be a small place, but a very dangerous one. And when we are in nothing but conflict with those allies, we're a far more precarious situation.
And Michael and Vaishyu, I wanted to ask you too. We've talked a lot about tonight what we're against and what is really bad about this bill, and obviously we're staring at this big, horrible bill. But from your perspective, what are one or two things that, if we did get power, we were in charge, what should we be doing instead?
I've got some ideas. Well, look, I think that what people want is their government to be on their side and not on the side of big corporations or billionaires or people who are just donors or well-connected. And I think that should be the overriding goal. That should be the North Star. How can we make sure that government is on the side of working people, people who are struggling every day just to make ends meet, who are thinking about how to put food on the table and how to give their kids a better life. That's most Americans, but it's not billionaires and it's not the super wealthy and it's not giant corporations. So I think that there's a lot we could do just in the tax code. I'm here to talk about taxes, which I know makes me very popular. But listen, we have a situation in this country where there are billionaires who pay a lower tax rate than a teacher or a firefighter or a nurse. And that is a choice. That's not an accident. That's a choice that previous Congresses have made, and we should make a different choice. We should ask wealthy people and corporations to pay their fair share and invest those resources in the well-being of working people, people who get up every day and do right by their families and their communities. And there's lots of ways to do that, but the very first thing we should do is be asking wealthy people and corporations to pay their fair share.
Thanks. Vaishyu, what do you think?
I think at Protect Our Care, I don't see us stopping what we're doing until healthcare is a human right like it should be in this country. One thing that's definitely crushing people right now is the cost of prescription drugs. 1 in 4 Americans still rations drugs or skips medications and can't fill the prescriptions that they need. And we have a great Medicare drug price negotiation program that was established by Democrats and allowed them to negotiate the prices of drugs for the first time ever in history. And we have Republicans trying to claw away at that at a time when most Americans think that we should be expanding it so that more drugs have their prices negotiated and more Americans can benefit from that regardless of how they get their insurance. So I think there's a lot of progress to be made, and we look forward to working on that when the time comes.
Thank you. And we did just get one more question before I go to the lightning round. Stephen from Lakeview, and this one's for you, Michael, asked, how does the bill affect small businesses, specifically the SCORE program, if you're familiar? Oh,
that's a great question. So there is a provision in this bill that Republicans talk about as being they say it's for small businesses. It's a deduction for income that is earned by what's known as a pass-through business. So not a corporation, but a business that is organized as either a partnership or an S corporation. Please bear with me. Don't turn your TV off. I talk about S corporations. But what's interesting about that provision is that half of the benefit goes to millionaires. That's not a mistake. That's half of the benefit goes to millionaires because they didn't design the bill to actually focus on actual true small businesses who employ people and create jobs. They allowed a loophole big enough for a private equity firm to drive a truck through, and that's what this bill would do. And in fact, they expanded that loophole in this provision. So there's lots we could do in the tax code to make it easier for small businesses, true small businesses, to create jobs and invest here at home. Unfortunately, this bill does not do that. It expands a loophole that really benefits very wealthy people and not truly small businesses.
Great. I'm conscious of time, so I want to move us to what we're calling our lightning round, where we're actually going to veer off the bill a little bit and get into some of the other topics. We got so many questions from constituents outside of this reconciliation bill. So while we won't be able to dive as deeply on these topics, and please know we will have other town halls where we can go deeper on any and all of these topics, so don't hesitate to reach out to our office to let us know. We're going to do our best to touch on a few of these topics today. So the very first question for the lightning round is on immigration, and Petra asked, what are we doing to stop people from getting disappeared and to get them out of detention, and how much taxpayer money is being spent on private ICE facilities? Congressman.
This is just brutal to watch, and it keeps you up at night. And the fact the President of the United States talked about giving up the Statue of Liberty, right? Understanding who we are as a nation of immigrants. So it's very personal for me, and it's something we're going to fight very hard for. You know, what gives me hope here is I do believe the American public want the border to be secure, and I think that's what they voted for. But they didn't vote to have ICE break windows and drag kids away and people away from their kids. I go to schools in my district where parents are briefed on what happens if ICE comes to the school, and kids are being told this is what's going to happen under those circumstances. You know, disappearing people, as we're hearing about, is something that happens in a dictatorship. It doesn't happen in the United States, and we're not going to stand for it. The good news is we now see about 70% of Americans believe that immigrants who enter the country should have a chance at citizenship if they meet certain requirements, right? So that, you know, President Ronald Reagan talked about a path to citizenship, signed bills on that twice. So I think that's where the American people are. They want to give people an opportunity to move toward being an American citizen. And clearly, when we have press conferences about this in my district, the Chamber of Commerce is there, the farmers are there, the hospitality industry is there, and so many more, because this is necessary. It's what builds a tax base for the future. So when you tell the IRS that we want you to give up the names of people who are paying taxes so we can deport them, you're really moving in the wrong direction. So yeah, this bill spends $45 billion on new detention facilities, more than 13 times their current detention budget. So I don't think that's what the American people want. We should secure our border, and we should have a finally passed comprehensive immigration reform and move together forward in our country.
Great, great. And did you want to add anything else about the recent Supreme Court decision that ruled that, in fact, individuals do need to be given notice and reasonable opportunity to challenge their removal? Because I know due process is also at the root of this concern.
Look, this is, you know, a step in the right direction. I'm always a little cautious saying, you know, yay for the Supreme Court, because I'm worried about tomorrow's decision. But this is something, you know, that, as you said, you know, they send an important message that this is a constitutional right, that there's due process due to everyone who is in the United States of America. So when you couple that with the fact that the president in his first term and currently is destroying the legal structure that allows for that due process, that only makes this so much more difficult to accomplish. No matter what the courts decide, if there isn't a structure in place, there isn't going to be a process for people to have that due process if there aren't the courts, if there aren't the judges and the staff that come with it.
Great. I'm going to move us on to our next topic, which is on tariffs and prices. Bruce from Chicago asked, if there's a recession because of tariffs, what measures can Congress do to help keep grocery prices in check, especially for seniors?
Right. I mean, It's funny, I'm quoting the Wall Street Journal talking about what a dumb policy these tariffs are. There's a few instances in which targeted tariffs do matter when you're talking about rogue states, for example, or to protect certain industries and who have been retaliated against. But, this indiscriminate policy, is really just a tax that's going to make everything more expensive for Americans. So to answer the question, the best way to prevent that from happening is prevent the tariffs from going forward. So the good news is, on the Senate side, we saw some Republicans vote for a measure to reverse this particularly harmful process when it came to Canada. When it came to the House, Speaker Johnson actually changed the rules, so even though there was a discharge petition that Republicans signed that would let that bill come to the floor, he changed the rules so that we can't do that until September. So the best way to prevent it is to prevent those from being put in place. Clearly, the president has gone beyond his constitutional powers to do this. This is only supposed to happen, he's only supposed to have these abilities in an emergency basis. Well, clearly, when he took office, no one could say the economy was any sort of a crisis. It is now in a crisis, moving toward the threat of a recession, and the concerns this person justifiably has a recession at the same time you have an extraordinary amount of inflation taking place. So my short answer is the best way for me to help them is to try to prevent it in the first place.
Great, great. I want to pause for a minute in case Michael or Vaishu, you guys want to add anything in on tariffs. I know there have been some talks about tariffs on drug prices, but just want to leave that open in case you guys have anything to add.
I'll just add that, whatever you might think about tariffs as a broad policy idea, we know that who pays the tariffs are low and middle income families because prices will go up, and that's true. And they're using those tariffs in part as a justification for why they can cut taxes elsewhere, mostly for, as we've talked about, wealthy people and corporations. So what they are really saying is that you should pay more so that rich people can pay less. And that is really hard to defend, even if you believe that tariffs can be a useful tool, as the congressman said, in certain circumstances. I don't think anybody would agree that people should pay more at the grocery store and at Costco or Target or Walmart just so that a wealthy person can pay a lot less in taxes. And that is what's happening here.
Yeah. I want to get to Social Security. We got quite a few questions about this. Linda from Mount Prospect asked, is Trump going to cut Social Security too? And we got another question asking, is Trump returning the 7,000 Social Security workers?
I would argue the president has already cut Social Security by those 7,000 people cut that he's already put forward. My staff tells me about the wait times now that people trying to discuss their benefits or to get the benefits are having to wait much, much longer. I think that's purposeful to make it more difficult. They were trying to pass policies and procedures where you'd have to appear in person. And obviously for many seniors, the access, the issues with disabilities would make that almost impossible, and those would be de facto cuts. A federal court has issued a restraining order blocking the DOJ cuts there from accessing private data. Will they go further and block this and make them bring back those 7,000 workers? We hope that they do. It does make a big difference. Will they ultimately get to cutting Social Security? I think they're creating a situation where they can argue they have to. They're creating a situation where they're dramatically increasing the debt and the deficit. And I think having created the crisis, they're going to say the only way to solve this is to cut Social Security. So they're creating a crisis so they can hurt, unfortunately, more people later on because of the extraordinary shortfalls that this proposal puts forward.
Michael, anything to add?
Yeah, just to add, Congressman is exactly right. And I just want to remind people that Donald Trump promised not to cut Medicaid when he was running for president. And here we have a bill in front of this Congress today that would absolutely cut Medicaid. He has 100% broken that promise. So any promises that he's made in the past about, I won't cut Social Security, are worth the same paper that he wrote the no cuts to Medicaid promise on. And I think the congressman is 100% right that the debt is going to run up, and then they're going to say, we don't have the money for Social Security. I guess we have to cut it. And he's also right, I will say he's 100% correct, that the cuts to the Social Security Administration are already cuts to Social Security.
Great. We have a question in the chat from Kate on the near north side. And I'm sort of laughing because I already know the answer to this. She wanted to know, Congressman, have you read the new book by Ezra Klein, Abundance? I did not plant this question.
You know, I've read the book. It's an extraordinary, painful book to read. Brings back a difficult time. And people say, well, do we really want to talk about what took place on the closing days of the Biden administration leading up to what took place with him stepping aside? I think we do. I think there's powerful, important lessons. We need to talk about it. We need to have discussions about this, what this means. We need to learn from it to make sure it never happened again. Never happens again. The bottom line is, you can't tell the American people that what they're not seeing isn't true. So you have to be candid, you have to be honest, you have to learn from that, and we have to move forward.
And I know, just to clarify, 2 big books came out. One, Original Sin by Jake Tapper, which I know we'll be talking about, which I know you're quoted in. And the other one is Abundance, which is about building more housing and transportation. And Ezra Klein, two books in one.
Okay,
but did you?
Yeah,
two books this week. But quickly, have any thoughts on Abundance?
Look, I think the lesson from Abundance, as people move forward, is that we have created a situation where the issues that we tried to solve in the 60s and 70s, we solved in a manner that is now creating some of the problems here. We have a scarcity of housing because we were, with our hearts in the right place, trying to do things appropriately to overcome past sins. So I think that's true for a lot of the issues that we're facing right now, including energy production. So I think this takes America facing the real task there and understanding we can do more than one thing at a time, and that we have to address housing issues and energy shortage issues and healthcare issues, the shortages there, including healthcare providers, with very thoughtful discussions and reassessing what our priorities are.
Thanks for that. We just have one more question. We're going to zoom out to the international perspective here that we got online, which is, we've seen a complete dismantling of the international humanitarian sector. Will you commit to maintaining current funding levels for international assistance in the fiscal year 2026 appropriations? Yeah,
and I'm talking to Secretary of State Marco Rubio about this tomorrow. He's in front of my committee, and I'm going to tell him. When you were a senator, you said that foreign aid isn't charity, it's vital to our national interests and security. Do you still believe that? These cuts are morally wrong, but as often is the case, the right thing to do is often the smart thing to do, and that's clearly the case here. Defense Secretary Mattis said, if you cut foreign aid, you better buy me more bullets. We are safer helping other people. And by the way, our first line of defense in the next pandemic isn't the shores, it's countries far away. And if we cut vaccination programs there, we're going to have those illnesses here. Great. Well, I know we have 1 minute left, so I'll let you close this out, Congressman. Look, I want to thank the staff here who helped with this in the House recording studio, my extraordinary staff that helped us, our experts for tonight, thank you. We aren't experts at putting on these productions, so we certainly need their help. But we're trying to communicate as much as we possibly can and to learn with you at the same time. So let us know what you think we should focus on other things. I'm geared up, ready to go. We've got a lot of things to do. We're going to discharge petitions. We're going to follow up with our votes, doing the messages that we continue to do. I'm going to be communicating to everyone I possibly can in the country and staying in touch with you. The only way out is through. We all have to be committed to understanding that this is as important time as we've ever had. I, like you, thought we had lived through the last of the Trump administration. And my friends across the sea have told me, we thought one time was a mistake, twice, maybe that's who you are as a country. I don't believe that. I believe that we must all be committed to understand that everything our forefathers fought for and what they brought forward to us is now clearly upon our shoulders, and that working together, reminding ourselves that there's more that unites us than divides us. We will be okay. We'll move forward together. It's not a spectator sport. Let's all do our part. Thank you so much for listening.